Question those who profess the truth. The external can sustain. Don't be seduced. Yeah. Enlightenment has a price tag. So you can pay 200 for your soul's healing. Bringing on those in pain. Empty promises to those who hurt. In the name of a leader who people pay due. Ain't no love, just energy impure and untrue. You gotta be real, otherwise, how can you be uncompromised? Question those who profess the truth. The external can sustain. You gotta be real, otherwise, how can you be uncompromised? Question those who profess the truth. The external can sustain. Don't be seduced. You gotta, otherwise, be uncompromised. Question those who profess the truth. The external can sustain. Question those who profess the truth. Question those who profess the truth. The external can sustain.
Bright light on the corner of a dark street. Just a cardboard sign and a can in between some dirty bare feet. Eyes that I can't bring myself to meet. Yeah, well I could spare 20 if I knew you'd be using it to get just what you need. And ooh, 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 I'm just another cold shoulder. Ooh. You're somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody's mother, father, somebody's someone, somebody's missing you. Wherever you came from, wherever you go, I hope you know you're somebody's someone, you're somebody's someone. Picking up the phone, who's it gonna be this time? This time it's the sound of your voice, but it ain't really you on the line. When you're gonna come out on the other side? Well, it's on you, cause you know there ain't nothing we can do, no matter how hard we're trying. Ooh, 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 can't make you drink that water. Ooh, ooh. You're somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody's mother, father, somebody's someone, somebody's missing you. Wherever you came from, wherever you go, I hope you know you're somebody's someone. You're somebody's someone. And I will lose you time and time again. But I will be there with you until the end. 'Cause you're my only brother, you're my mother's son, and I'm still your little sister. Somebody, someone, we're all still missing you. Back where you came from, wherever you go, we hope you know you're somebody, someone. You're somebody, someone. You're somebody, someone. You're somebody, someone. Bright light on the corner of a dark street.
No time to say bye, but giving thanks, trying to find peace of mind. The world spins around, but don't let it pull you down. I am what I am. You are who you are. Ashes down on the ground surround me. Let love and connection set you free. Community together, one becomes we. I'm dreaming of a new start, and light shine from the heart. Sun rises, light flows on, memories healing, but never gone. Loss turns to meaning and gain. Resilience, tough bliss. Rising out of the fire, sailing through. hope and desire. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm dreaming of a new start. Let light shine from the heart. Sun rises, life goes on. Memories healing, never gone.
All of the lies I believed got the better of me. Never thought there could be so much doubt. All the blame and the hate, the self-hurt and the heartbreak, a fist that kept holding me down. And I was my own worst enemy. And I found my way through it all. And finally I see I'm enough, just as I am. Feel right at home anywhere that I stand. Hold out my heart in the palm of my hand, and I live my life like nobody else can. I am enough. I am enough for the laughter, the life that I'm after, enough for my wildest dreams. Yeah, 'cause every flaw from my toe to my jaw is exactly where it's supposed to be. And I know I got something to say. And I'm gonna remind myself every day I'm enough, just as I am. Feel right at home anywhere that I stand. Hold out my heart in the palm of my hand, and I live my life like nobody else can. I am, I am, I am. Oh, I used to look in the mirror and see all the fear. I could see all that fear in my eyes. Then I saw it get clearer, like the blue in the sky. After that storm rolls through, the sun will shine down on you. And I am enough, just as I am. Feel right at home anywhere that I stand. Hold out my heart in the palm of my hand, and I live my life like nobody else can. I am, I am, I am. I'll sing it again. I am, I am, I am. All of those lies I believed got the better of me. Never thought there could be so much doubt. Her name was Tracy, her name was Joe. Her name wasn't Lana when they found her, so they're calling her Jane Doe. She went by Stacy, she went by Faye. She went by herself to a bar down the street one Saturday. Well, some girls are long lost before they ever leave, and some never even get a chance to show up. Some girls are never asked what they wanna be. and told they're not enough. And I'll pray for the day, for the day, for the day all the girls all around the world will be free. And I'll say a name, say a name, say a name, and keep fighting. Never even get a chance to show up. There's some girls that never ask what they wanna be, and so they're not enough. And I pray for the day, for the day, for the day all the girls all around the world will be free. And I'll say a name, say a name, say a name, and keep fighting for equality. Yes, you'll last on, but you'll never be gone. And it's always darkest before the dawn. And in her eyes is a fire that still burns for change. And I'm gonna grab that torch and carry on till the day that I have to pass it on. March along to the drum that won't fade. It ain't getting any better when the story's the same. And I pray for the day, for the day, for the day all the girls all around the world will be free. And I'll say a name, say a name, say a name, and keep fighting for equality.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the second episode of Path to Hope Live. This event is being recorded. My name is Dan Sherman. My preferred pronouns he, him, and his, and I am the Community Health Investment Manager for Providence St. Joseph Health here in Sonoma County. We're excited to bring you today's second event in the Path to Hope Live series on suicide prevention, resilience building, and dealing with the grief, loss, and mental health challenges of our times. The power of human connection to heal is both fundamental and profound, and we hope that this series of events will help make those connections as we all seek balance and renewal in our lives and communities. During these presentations throughout the series, we want everyone to feel welcomed and safe. So to that end, we're providing an interpretation option for our Spanish-speaking neighbors joining us today. If you'd like to hear the presentation in Espanol, click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We also welcome and encourage you to include your preferred personal pronouns in your Zoom name. And to do that, you click on the small three-dot menu that appears when you hover over your image and choose Rename. If you have any trouble with that, look in the chat for instructions. We also have breakout rooms available, recognizing that our content is emotionally charged and can be triggering. So anyone who may feel triggered in any way by the content being presented, these spaces are available, and they're both bilingual, and they're staffed by our partners from Bucklew and Humanidad Therapy and Education Services. These are not meant to be therapy sessions, but just someone to talk to if you feel you need it. To access these, click the breakout room icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then you choose either Peer Support Group 1, Bucklew, or Peer Support Group 2, Humanidad. Remember that the Path to Hope Live will have 5 more virtual events from now to January 21st. See the link in the chat for more information, but I do want to call out that Daphne Willis, whose music you heard in the waiting room before we got started, will be doing our next episode a week from today on the 10th, and her topic will be tools for coping with isolation. And I'm sure we will be hearing some more of Daphne's music, her performing it during that presentation. I also want to recognize our partners in presenting this series, Bucklew Programs, Humanidad Therapy and Education Services, and the Sonoma County Department of Health Services Behavioral Health Division. A special thanks to all of them and to all of you for joining us today. And now on to our program. Today, we're going to be hearing about racism and the impact on mental health. Please keep this in mind as we hold space together in the chat. We will be moderating the chat, and we ask that there is compassionate, kind, and caring communication. And as allies in this work, we will be removing those who are inappropriate for the safety of our speaker and panelists. We are all learning in public together, so we will be doing our best with our own limitations, and we ask you to hold grace for our learning as well. Today's program is broadly titled Racism and Mental Health, and during the first hour, we will hear a talk by Kelechi Ubozoh entitled Healing During 2020, Navigating Racial Violence, Mental Health Crisis, and Survivorship. And we'll follow that with a panel discussion featuring local voices and perspectives on racism and mental health. Kelechi Ubozoh is a Nigerian-American writer and mental health advocate and consultant. She's been featured in the S Word documentary, CBS This Morning with Gayle King, and the Oprah magazine. Her first book, We've Been Too Patient, Voices from Radical Mental Health, was released from North Atlantic Books and Penguin Random House last summer. And as a consultant, Ms. Ubozoh supports government agencies and community-based organizations with facilitation and training, coaching and planning, research, and community engagement. In her talk today, she will share her personal journey as a suicide attempt survivor, her experience of racism in the mental health system, and how she channeled her pain into advocacy and holding healing spaces for Black employees. We'll also see some clips from the S Word documentary and hear excerpts from the peers in her We've Been Too Patient book on what suicide attempt survivors wish you knew. Kelechi, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Dan. And I want to just give a special thanks to Erica Chloe, who has been so intentional about the space, about making it inviting, inclusive. I've never been to a place where there has been interpretation on Zoom. So kudos to you all for just really thinking about what inclusion means. So I'm going to be sharing some of my story today. It might be activating, so please take care of yourself. I try not to go into too deep of details, but really just give you the important tidbits. And I want you to think about two things today, if you can. So the first thing is thinking about suicide prevention. How can you promote connection in your life and the life of others? Connectivity is a huge, important scientific tool in suicide prevention. We don't think of connectivity as a tool, but that actually keeps us all safer. So where can you promote connectivity in your life and the lives of others? And the second thing I'd love for you to think about is think about where in your different agencies, in your world, in your school, it doesn't matter how old you are or where you are across the world, think about where you sit in power. Maybe you're someone who has a high position in your organization. Maybe you are a really big extrovert and people listen to you when you talk, right? Power looks different across the spectrum. But I want you to think about where you can be intentional about disrupting racism and being inclusive. Those are the two things. If you hear nothing else that I say, you at least heard those two things. So I think that would be my takeaways before we start. So I'm going to start with a poem. It's called She Wasn't Crazy. It's from the book We've Been Too Patient. And I did this book with my co-editor, LD Green, who is amazing. And then I'll be sharing some clips from the S Word. I'm going to try to read a little slower so that interpretation can happen. So just know that I'm trying to be intentional too as we're in this space together. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't crazy, but the world had a way of making her feel so. You try being a Black goth girl in Stone Mountain, Georgia. She liked vampires and Morrissey and how the darkness wrapped around her like a warm, familiar blanket. She was always too sensitive and too reactive, felt every feeling at high voltage. She wasn't crazy, but she said whatever she wanted, spilled words from her lips like red wine on white carpets. She left many stains. They called her Crazy K and it stuck. She never slept. She crawled up fire escapes to hang off the edge, longingly looking down. She flirted with death. She wanted to know if she let go, would she be free? She wasn't crazy, but when her grandmother, the ultimate matriarch who kissed her thick eye-lined face and marveled at her choice of combat boots with fishnets, well, when grandma died, the darkness welled up and started choking her. She wanted to stop the world and get off because when your world ends, but you're still alive, there's something crazy about that. She was 13 when she wrote the first suicide note. It was on a Post-it. She wasn't crazy, but succinct. She wasn't crazy, just honest. She didn't want to live. She got messy, and a friend found the note and called her mom. And all her mom could say is, why, baby, why? The words left her. Was she crazy? But she didn't feel crazy. They stripped her down like an animal, took her shoelaces, put her on suicide watch while she squirmed on an uncomfortable cot. She felt crazy then. The psych ward for kids smelled like every hospital, bleach with a stench of death and disappointment. Even in this place, there was a psych ward hierarchy. They separated the kids with eating disorders from the crazy kids. The frail-looking teens never made eye contact, but the other kids got it. They all dreamed of McDonald's French fries and getting out of this sterile purgatory, this life-size pause button. One day, little Christine tried to open the locked door, but it wouldn't budge. The security guard said, "We lock it to keep the crazy people out." She laughed uncontrollably, but in hindsight, she could see that he was right, because when she left the psych ward, she created a papier-mâché mask of glitter and light. She smiled until her eyes bugged out. She stopped wearing liquid eyeliner and made everyone feel comfortable. She said all the right things and lied about the darkness. See, all better now. The moment she stopped telling the truth, that was when she was truly crazy. So clearly I don't condone calling anyone crazy. So that's my little PSA at the bottom of that. But really, my hope is to flip that word and share a little bit about my experience. So a little bit of background on me is that I grew up in New York I was born in New York and lived there for some years, and I had big emotions. I was very dramatic and had lots of feelings. My mom later said she should have put me in acting classes because I was just a little bit extra as a kid. And I was accepted there in New York. My mom ended up getting a job in Atlanta, Georgia, and she moved us down to the South. So I just want you to take a moment to imagine a Black goth girl moving from New York to Stone Mountain, Georgia in the 90s. Now, I'm sure now there'd be like an adorable Netflix heartwarming show about it, but in the 90s, it was horrible. I didn't fit in anywhere. I was so different from the kids in my neighborhood. And my mom also wanted me to get a really good education. So she actually had me bust over so many schools into a different area. Georgia, very, very segregated. And so I went to school with mostly white students who didn't look like me, and I didn't feel accepted there. But I also didn't feel accepted in my neighborhood either. So I just felt a lot of things. I also experienced racism in a different way, getting followed in stores, just very confusing for me as a young person. So my mom is starting a primary care doctor business, and she decides to have grandmother come down to help raise me. I got to tell y'all about grandma. I say the same thing about her every time, but grandma was an angel. She did not care that I blew up her phone bill calling 1-800-psychics to see if that guy in my class really liked me, if he was a Sagittarius and it met my Leo status. She and I would watch Murder, She Wrote every day, curled up together. She thought every meal should have a dessert, and she just saw me, fully me, and totally accepted me. And she felt like my mom. While my mom was busy, my grandmother and I were always together. And when we weren't together, grandma was babysitting my Tamagotchi pet. So there was a lot of love in our house and support. So when grandmother started getting sick and eventually died from cancer, I didn't feel like I wanted to be alive anymore. So I told a friend, that I didn't want to be here anymore. My friend told a teacher, this is in high school, at a private school. And so before you knew it, everybody knew what was going on with me. And my mom sent me to a child psychiatric ward. Now, back where we were in the South, in the place we were, mental health services for children were not great. So as I described in my poem, it was scary. I felt like I had gone to jail, like I had done something bad, because there was like fluorescent lights, there was just everything taken away. And in the psych ward, I was told a lot of really problematic messages. I was told I was broken. I was told I would never get better. I was told that I would be dependent on medication for the rest of my life. And basically I was told that I had a debilitating illness and that the best I could help for is just to feel numb. This was really not good messaging, as I'm sure any one of you can imagine. When I left the psych ward, we had a big church community. I went back to church. I went back to school. My church community, though I loved and supported them, and I understand why they were so scared, the first thing they said was, this is a sin. You were bad. This is selfish. And they also gave me messages that, Black people don't have mental health issues. You're being dramatic. It's in your head. I also heard messages that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. All of these things that weren't really helpful to me, because for me, my problem was permanent. My grandmother wasn't here. I didn't feel like I fitted anywhere, and I didn't feel like anyone loved me. Also in school, I got bullied a lot because everyone knew my business. So what I decided to do was stuff all the feelings down. I was like, you know what? I'm never going to tell anyone how I truly feel again. I'm going to stick this all down inside, and we'll just pretend to be happy, because that will make people comfortable and that will make people love me. And I was really seeking love from other people, and I couldn't find it for myself. So I ended up stuffing stuff down for years. It's kind of amazing what you can do when you avoid yourself. When I mean years, I'm talking like 5 years. So I ended up going to college. I go back to New York. I do really well. I start doing journalism. I love stories. I love listening to people. I love collecting information and hearing these beautiful stories from people. And it also allows me to be close with people without actually being close with people. Because when you're listening to people's stories, they feel close to you, but I was able to kind of hide what was going on with me. So I poured myself into my work. But I also made an interesting life choice of wanting to be a print journalist in 2007. So in 2008, you can imagine, I graduated, the recession is happening. I'm a print journalist, but I also have to get 2 other jobs just to survive. So I'm still having these thoughts. And really, I want to explain the thoughts a little bit. When the thoughts first started as like, you're a failure. No one cares about you. No one loves you. And then depending on what would happen, I mean, I could get a parking ticket and it could go from you're a failure to you shouldn't be here anymore. You deserve to die. It was just quick. Like my thoughts would go from here to here, bottom really quickly. And I didn't know how to interrupt them. So I really struggled with that. So imagine now I'm working all these jobs. I'm living with 2 roommates in New York. Not everyone's getting along with each other. It's hard to like clean the dish and someone's mad at you. There's just like a lot of feelings happening. And I actually decide, you know what, even though that psych ward was really scary, I think I need to go back and get some professional help, because I'm really worried about myself. I mean, I was having lots of thoughts of self-harm, and I decided to get help. So what I'll tell you is, I went to the psych ward and I tried to get help. And one thing they did was they said, nothing's wrong with you. You're totally fine. Because I'm a Black woman, because I present well, because the way that I sound right now is actually the way that I sound consistently when I say I need help. They said, oh, you're imagining, it's in your head. So they kept me for observation for like 24 hours. But when I told them I'm having deep pain and I'm really sad, they just said, you're fine, don't worry about it. And it was culturally irresponsible. I was calling out for help, but just because my ask for help doesn't look like a Lifetime movie, it just wasn't heard. So I'm gonna share a little bit, I'll share a couple of clips from the film, The S Word, that I want to illustrate a little bit about like what that wearing a mask was like, and also what being cast as a strong Black woman is like. Erica, can you see the screen? Okay, thumbs up.
If you asked anyone in my school, they would say, Kelechi was the happiest person I ever knew. But I wasn't happy. I just wanted people to think that I was happy so that I could have my dark, scary thoughts by myself. It was honestly like a job. Like I put on my happy skin, went out to the world, to the masses, and then came home and shed it. It was this interesting like dance of I keep myself safe, but get to be close with you, but you don't actually know me. Oh, I was lying so much. I was lying, pretending. I could have just been, and then we could have maybe planned around it or had a conversation, and it could have been so different.
Okay. So that's a little bit of that experience, and I want to share a couple of more clips. Sorry if that's going too fast. Okay, that's my mom.
There's this idea of this strong Black woman. She's so strong and she can take care of everything and everyone else. And it's difficult to show your vulnerabilities because we're just not painted in that way. But I think when I'm cast as a strong Black woman, it's actually really harmful because I too am crying and I am hurting and I'm cast in this like caregiver role for the world. And you're not taught to be vulnerable. Vulnerable is a white thing. Vulnerable isn't a Black thing. That is a detriment. Caretaking for the world and not taking care of yourself, that is when, I don't know, that's when some stuff goes down. You know, stop trying to be a superhero to someone else's life and, you know, save your damn self, you know? Yeah.
Okay. I think I stopped sharing. I can't see everyone. I cannot see the meeting. Okay, hi again. So, and hopefully you understand what I'm saying, or some of you can feel that when I'm put in a position as a caregiver and when I'm asking for help and it's not believed, it's so challenging. And it doesn't just happen to Black women. It can happen to many women or many people who are used to taking care of people and just being the caregiver in their entire family, right? Holding it down. And those are the people I'm always worried about. The ones who never ask for help, who are always the first person you call. I'm like, why aren't we community collectively taking care of those folks who are showing up all of the time? So I'm gonna get off my like soapbox for a moment and get back to my talk, but that's those are some fun facts for you. So I leave the psych ward with no tools, with no more information, some medication that makes me drowsy, and essentially the idea that no one's gonna take me seriously. Unfortunately, a couple of days later, literally 3 days later, after I tried to get help, I was sexually assaulted. No need to get into details. It's not helpful for anyone here, but it's important to know. And at that moment, I just felt like that mask inside, that I was holding everything together, that I was gonna figure out this money and all these jobs, and I'm gonna make my mom proud. It just broke. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I said, I don't wanna be here. So I attempted and I survived. I think the important part is that I survived. And I wasn't ready to stay right after the attempt, but I did before the attempt happened. I actually prayed and I said, if I end up staying here, if this doesn't work out, please show me a different way, because everything that I'm doing is not working. This is tremendously exhausting. And when I woke up the next day, I called the ambulance to get help myself because I was alone. And the help that I got in the hospital wasn't helpful, but what it did do was alert my mother that I really needed help. And she said, baby, what are we gonna do? Because I didn't even know anything was wrong. What can I do? What to support? What do you need? And I hadn't been honest with her about what I needed. And I needed real help. And the help that I needed was to pick a therapist who I picked, who I wasn't assigned, who was funny and who could call me out when I lied. Because I spent a lot of money in therapy, wasting money by lying and pretending I was okay, which I definitely don't recommend, spending hundreds of dollars in therapy and not going. we went back to Georgia, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. But I went back, and we actually got me really good help. And unfortunately, and I should say this, I have a huge privilege. My mom, not only is she a Black mama, she's a Black mama doctor. So she's kicking out doors, she's getting me in, she's like yelling at people, she's advocating, she's like, my baby's gonna be taken care of. I know that not everyone has family privilege like that, or even a doctor who can fight head to toe with someone who says, no, her issues are real, please take her seriously. Not everyone has that. But I have a mystical, amazing mother. And when I stopped lying to her and included her in my recovery plan, my life changed. It changed completely. And I wasn't alone. So, I mean, my help looked like removing toxic people from my life, getting boundaries that I never had before, because I'm a recovering like super Black hero who was trying to save everyone and a people pleaser. Let me tell you, people pleasing, that pleased no one, especially not myself. So there was a lot of work to do that, and also to understand why I didn't like myself, why I wanted to find love from other people, but I didn't think I deserved to be on this planet. What happened to me? So there was a lot of work to unpack that and decide why I wanted to stay, why I deserved to be here, because I wasn't going to stay for anyone else. I needed to stay for myself. Not guilt, not shame, just what was it going to take for me to stay? So that was a very long and beautiful process. I'm going to share a little bit about that process in a couple of clips, and then I want to move us into a conversation a little bit more about the impact of racism and mental health. But for now, I'll share a little bit more about what does asking for help mean? And then I want to say, like, again, we're talking about suicide. There are resources that are here, which is important to note, and you have those resources. So if you need to take care of yourself, if you are activated in any way, please know that, that makes complete sense. And if you need to take a break because it's heavy, take a break. Please take care of yourself. Okay, I'm gonna share I love sharing my screen, I swear. I'm gonna share my screen one more time, and then we will stop sharing screens. Or I'll talk about sharing my screen and I won't. Yay, this is live, no pressure, no pressure. Aha. Oh my goodness, thank you guys for hanging out with me. Okay, can you see anything? Thumbs up? Okay, great. So we're gonna go to asking for help, and then you're gonna get to meet my mom, who is this beautiful, amazing person. Okay.
Asking for help is so brave because it's so uncomfortable, and we don't talk about that as a strength. It's just like sucking it up and like almost dying is better than actually having community support. I don't think so. It is okay not to be okay. Having to unravel that and process it and actually believe that I actually deserved help was a huge undertaking. It took years. I think it's important for especially youth to hear the message of if your friend tells you a secret, they're going to kill themselves, you need to tell someone. If we were talking about suicide more, it wouldn't be so taboo and terrifying. It would be oh, this is where you're at. Well, let's see what this is about. If someone would have just sat with me in that dark, sad, uncomfortable place, it almost opens you up to oh, you're not running away from me? Okay.
We actually made a plan. So in the future, if those feelings came up, that we would communicate. And I just listened a lot. And then I think basically my heart just told me what to say.
I don't think anyone needs to have the answer for them. They just need to be there and sit. And it's not a comfortable place to sit. So it's a lot to ask someone, but sitting with that person at their lowest point and letting them know they're not alone, that can be so much more powerful than anything else.
Okay.
You might see in a lifetime.
Share this last one on recovery.
I would tell the young Kelechi to stop trying to chase this happy ending that she saw in a fairy tale and just try to chase health. Because I'm not happy all the time. Life is gonna give you some lemonade, it's gonna give you some crap, it's gonna give you a whole bunch of stuff. I kept waiting for things to get better. But the only thing that could get better was me. To me, that's what recovery is. It doesn't mean never being depressed or sad or like anxious or any of the things that you feel. It means that you see that and you learn what works for you. Part of recovery is learning what does it look like when things start breaking down. What is this suicidal thought telling you? Maybe it's giving me information that something needs to change around me because I'm not happy. And I had never thought about like thinking about it that way. I had never heard of people mental health who also had.
Gonna stop sharing. All right. So I want to really just share, and thank you again for putting the resources for suicide prevention into the chat. I really, really appreciate that. And all the support, I'm seeing some support from we love Mama Bivens. So, wow, I think, and I'm going to just look for a second. The first need of a person in crisis is not the solution. Yeah. It's to no longer be alone in the crisis. Yes, that's beautiful. So when I talked about connectivity earlier, it's huge because I really felt like I was the only person experiencing what I was experiencing. And that moves me to, I think, the last part of my story. So spending all this time working on myself, getting better, healing, it was time for me to move on. And I was in Georgia and I heard about the Mental Health Services Act in California. I heard that there was funding specifically for peer support. I learned about what were peers, people who had lived experience of mental health issues, but received training on sharing their stories and supporting other people. And it was the first time I'd ever seen people who looked like me, who had shared similar experiences publicly, right? Because definitely I think across mental health, people don't get in the behavioral health work casually. I don't think it's a casual kind of job. I think they're either touched by their family or have had some impact on themselves. But when we're talking about peer support, people were talking publicly like, oh, hey, I've had this diagnosis and this is what my healing looked like. And I said, Mom, I'm going to move out to California and work in behavioral health. And she's like, okay, cool. I mean, you have no background in that, but let's get the car ready and let's drive. So we drove across the country to move me out to California to work in this work. And I am honored that I got to work at different mental health nonprofits and really understand how to show up as a peer. I'm really excited that I got to work at different consulting agencies that really focused on mental health. So I have had now almost a decade experience of working in the behavioral health system because I just took that chance and because my mom believed in my healing and supported my healing journey and didn't give up on me, and I didn't give up on myself. And this is not to say I don't experience struggle. Like this year, this year has been, it's been a year, tumultuous at best. And even last year, I was starting to have some doubts and having some experiences and challenges. But the difference between who I am today versus who I was then is I have a safety net. So if something goes off, I have a therapist that I talk to. My partner knows what's going on. I have a community around me. I have folks who know what to do. I do a wellness recovery action plan. So if you guys have ever heard of WRAP, I definitely would, if you haven't, definitely suggest you look into it. I make a plan when I'm doing well, so then I'm not doing well, I know what to do. And that's been really, really powerful for me. So I did notice my experiences in the system were really difficult. I had a really challenging time. And the more I did research in the behavioral health system, the more I learned about the disparities, the racial disparities that people experience, that people of color experience in the system, whether it's, oh, that person looks aggressive, or I think they're aggressive, so instead of getting them to behavioral health, I'm going to get them to jail mental health, right? Like whether it's, someone getting cops called on them for a mental health crisis and not being with us anymore because someone didn't understand that it was actually a mental health crisis, that no one was in danger. So I started seeing more of these conversations and hearing more of this. And then summer of 2020 happened. I want to fast forward us a little bit into this year. So 2020 has been a awakening for some people. Now, for those of us who are BIPOC, which again is a word that only came out this year. So, I mean, I'll be clear about that. I've never heard it before 2020, but Black, Indigenous, people of color, for those of us who have that lived experience, racism, racial injustice isn't new. But what happened in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other voices and people who we've lost, seen and unseen, their names we won't ever know. But because of how public it was, it felt like there was this huge surge of attention to and acceptance of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was sitting at home watching, mourning, just really sad and feeling really powerless about what was going on in the news. And yes, I could march. Yes, I could donate. Yes, I could do all of these things, but I wanted to do something else. And what I had the benefit of doing, and what I've been doing for the past 6 months, is I got the opportunity to hold healing spaces for Black employees. And that has been a huge gift. So I was contacted as a peer support specialist to hold these healing circles where Black people in either predominantly white settings or even like all Black settings, it was kind of globally, would come together on Zoom and just release and just have a place to release and talk about how racism was impacting their mental health. And the conversation we heard was exhaustion, right? Fear that this was a moment of hashtag activism, that everyone was in a book club of white fragility, but no policies were changing, no real change was going to happen. There's been this awakening, but the awakening was painful for people who have that experience every day. And for those of even my allies and friends who wouldn't believe me when I would tell them about a microaggression, and these are people who, you know, I consider liberal and have been doing their work, I would say, oh, I experienced this microaggression. And they'd say, well, really? I don't see it like that, right? Questioning me. There was a lot of questioning about reality, and then also questioning about what does it mean to make a letter? What does it mean to put a hashtag? What does it mean for my life as a person? And so I thought about what are the spaces that I can create as someone for other people to just release, just to be able to share and witness each other. And I want to say the Black community is not a monolith. We do not all agree with each other, right? We're complex people. And it's been beautiful to hold space to meet people wherever they're at, from wherever they are. And also to invite different conversations with allies. I've been doing this amazing work, and there's many facilitators and other folks from the group Discussions That Matter that have been holding these affinity spaces where folks can really talk about what 2020 has meant. The pandemic, meaning this isolation, losing folks, the racial violence that we're seeing and witnessing, frankly, just the unknown of what this time is, and how do we stay connected when things feel like they're falling apart, right? And it's been really, really important, impactful work. I also want to lift up that there is the California Reducing Disparities Project that exists in California and doesn't get a lot of love, doesn't get a lot of attention, but they have these pilot programs, these healing, culturally responsive programs like Sisters Mentally Mobilized that does sister circles. They have lots of amazing things. I'm so excited there's some in Sonoma County. But when I asked you that question before about what can you do in your seat of power, right? I want you to think about who's hurting right now and what support do they need? We can do all of the amazing anti-racist trainings ever. And I'm not saying stopping to do that. But when we talk about mental health, what does healing look like for those folks? I recently did a training, suicide prevention training, and I had someone who identified as Latinx say, thank you for the training, but you provided a lot of 800 numbers. I'm never gonna call an 800 number. I'm never going to call because I'm afraid. Our community knows not to call because of ICE. And I was like, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense. We need folks who are part of the community, from the community, not as token advisors on, on a table. I mean, they need to be co-creating decision makers, creating what healing looks like, because we know what healing looks like. But the folks who are at the table aren't always the folks who need to be at the table. So wherever you sit in your place, where can you make room? Where can you invite people in to do this work? Because it impacts us all. All of our mental health is impacted. And if there's one good thing about 2020 is that mental health became really popular this year. I have never been asked to give as many conversations or talks as I have this year. In fact, people would never want to talk to me about suicide because they're like, oh, we can't talk about it. And this year they're like, oh my gosh, we have to. So on the momentum of racial justice and mental health, where are you making room at the table? Where are you changing real policies? And where's your funding going? Where's your funding going? Are you funding those solutions that are going to actually help people heal? So I just want to really, really just share that insight. And I've been really excited to do this type of work and have this type of impact. And I would love to take some questions from you all because I've been talking for quite some time. So thanks for still listening to me. But yes, I want to just see if I can pop over to Erica to see if you've collected any questions and also like maybe took a peek in the chat. Erica, have you seen any? No? Does anyone have any questions? I think you guys are just having a lovely conversation in this chat. That's beautiful. Erica's like, what questions do you have? That's beautiful. Well, while you're thinking of questions that you may have, I want to just say that we do have an amazing panel coming up after me. And I think it's important because this is a Sonoma, like a little bit of a Sonoma focus, but it's open to the world, but to think about like locally what you have available to you and really supporting those messages and those conversations. So just want to put that there as well. Yes, more young people. I see Kalia has mentioned more young people. Would you share your thoughts about maternal mental health in particular? It's a really good question. I myself am not a mother, but what I will say is that there has been, there's many mothers, I'm an auntie, so I'll speak from my lived experience as an auntie. I will say more recently, there's been more conversations from women, from parents about maternal mental health, about postpartum. There's almost been like a real conversation that has been blooming. You know, when you step away from social media and everyone posting like adorable pictures of their kids and like the organic, like homemade muffins you made them, and like getting into real talk about like what's really happening, where do you feel detached? I feel like that's been opening up more. And I really think that I've heard about a lot of maternal mental health groups, those support groups where other mothers talk to each other about what they've been through and what their experiences have been through, like about feeling detached from their children or their partners and what that support looks like or moving through that. And I think it's a really good opportunity for peer support. I'm loving that, you know, I'm loving this conversation. How do we recommend resources for low-income African-American women for mental health? Do you recommend resources for low-income African women for mental health? Yes, I mean, I don't know if you guys know about Sisters Mentally Mobilized. They're an amazing group. They're part of the California, oh my goodness, these women are gonna be so upset with me because I've just paused on their name, Black Women's Network. I'm gonna get it together in my life. But what they've done is they've created these trainings where they train sisters on how to create circles for each other. And then they go out into different communities and hold space for each other. So they go through this training, they hold these circles, and it's a pretty like low income resource. So I think it's really, really important that those resources, or culturally responsive therapy, or can you train therapists on how to work with different Black communities and where, because I know a lot of Black therapists are really like tapped out, but where do you have that lived experience? Lots of other questions coming in. Would you please talk about how well-intentioned mental health providers unintentionally injure clients of color? Oh, Eliana, my co-director from Discussions That Matter, That's a really good question. So I do want to just say, like, just because you have good intention doesn't mean that intent equals impact. And we just heard a story from someone who joined us where, well, I'll even just share my own experiences that sometimes people really want to do well, but they think they have all the decisions. So, or like, for example, Black Lives Matters movement happens and you're in a behavioral health setting and, you know, you decide to have a focus group, or you decide with no one else that is actually part of your vulnerable community to make decisions about them without them. So I think one of the biggest things that can happen when folks have really good intentions, they don't always give away their power or say, like, who is the right person to be here? How am I going to create diversity and inclusion as a person who is not actually from that community? Where do I actually need to include them? And I think, I mean, even with social workers, right? I know sometimes we're like, oh, you know what? We should just have social workers come with peer support specialists to help people. And, you know, there's a lot of communities that are afraid of social workers because of the history, because families have been pulled apart. So there's a complex history and there's definitely good intention, but it's like, does your intent equal impact? Are you the right person to make this decision? And who is in the room, right? So I think those are, I mean, I wish I could give you even more questions, but yeah, those are really, really, really important things. And I'm seeing another question in here, and then I think I'm gonna turn it over. I'm curious to know what you would suggest for BIPOC to check our own privilege and help others step forward. Okay, so I think the question is, as someone who is BIPOC, how do you check your own privilege and help others move forward? So really good question. I also mentioned that I have privilege. Like, I grew up with a parent who was a doctor. I didn't want for anything. So I definitely have class privilege and other sorts of privileges. So I think one of the things we can do to check our own privilege is think about what we're doing. Are we internalizing things we learned from dominant culture? Or, you know, when we're acting or judging in the world, right? One of the things that I've noticed is, like, where am I judging someone who's from my own community? Where am I not actually uplifting someone? I've made a joke before that some of you might understand. Sometimes I've gone to parties where I might be the only Black person in the room and I see another Black person and I look at them and I'm like, are they going to be happy to see me? Or are they not going to be happy to see me because they wanted to be the only person here, right? And those are the moments that how do we get more of us in the room? And checking our own privilege sometimes means, like, what have I internalized that says maybe I need to grind harder, or I've internalized that for a Black person, right? Maybe I've internalized some messages that I'm lazy or that I haven't worked hard and that rest isn't productive and I have to do whatever to meet or compete, right? Some of that stuff I need to release and let go of because it's getting in the way of my mental health or other people's mental health. Am I competing with people who look like me, or are we actually building a bridge together to uplift? Part of me thinks is like it might come up as competition, but I have those are just some of my thoughts in that perspective. Okay. And I really think it's important to have people who don't have the same opinions as us in the space, because we need to have rich, different discourse. When I hold healing spaces for Black folks, we do not all agree at all. We are, you know, some people are like, I am on this side, I am on this side, but we do have commonalities about how we're treated and what that looks like. And so I think that's really important to consider. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions because the scrolling happens really quickly. Okay. Any other things that have come up? I love that you guys have CRDPs. What can we do? What can we do when we do not meet the criteria for help, when we reach out and are seen as resilient, strong individuals, often just before the breaking point? Oh, that's such a good question. This has been a struggle for me. So I haven't met the threshold for certain services, but what I will say is I definitely advocate to get into spaces. So I've said, when I haven't met the threshold, I said, look, I present really well. I am a suicide attempt survivor. That means I'm more likely at attempting again. So really take me seriously because I do need support. And so I think it's a little bit about advocacy. It's also trying to maybe get someone on, maybe on your side, maybe an ally to come into space with you. But that is definitely one of those things. And I'm never going to cry and break down when I come to get help, because that's just not how I am or who I am. It's just, I don't present that way. So I let people know I present in a way that appears to be, I hate this word, but I use it in clinical settings, high functioning. But when I say that I'm struggling, that means I'm really struggling considering my history. You have to take me seriously. I hope that makes sense. I almost have to like barge my way in. I barged my way in on that Yale panel. I was on a different panel, and then I asked to be on the hospital panel because I asked, has anyone on this panel ever been in a hospital, like as a patient? And they said no. And I was like, I want to be on that panel. So I think it's like, where do you, if there's not space for you, where do you create space for yourself? So I think that's those are really, really good questions. Yay, I'm glad that makes sense to someone. And question for you. Okay, I've had to support that conversation with a client who's not being taken seriously by other providers. It's so hard not to get frustrated watching it happen in front of you. Oh my gosh, I feel you so much, Holly. And thank you so much for supporting that conversation. I really, really do appreciate that. My mom, actually, so she's a primary care doctor. She had someone come in, presented really well, was dressed to the nines, and was really struggling with suicide. And, primary care doctors get a lot of folks coming in, and she said to this person, she said, wow, you're really struggling. And she said, yeah. And she said, does anyone believe you? And the woman just said, no one believes me. And my mom just hugged her and said, you sound like my daughter. And I just want to say, like, that human part of when someone asks you for help, believe them. Like, I think point blank, just believe them. So I really want to just share that out there. If sometimes they're like, oh, that's just a cry for help. When I did the film, The S Word, I'm in this entire film about suicide prevention and resiliency, and I thought I needed to appear better or healthy. And I was really struggling. I had really had a really tough year as that film was going on. I had called off my engagement, and now I have a camera crew following me around talking about suicide. And I was just honest with where I was and where I was at. And I think creating space for needing support. Thanks for talking about masks that Black folks wear as a survival tool. Very important. Oh, absolutely. And I want to say to all of the folks who are Black or BIPOC or anyone who wears a mask, anyone who's worn a mask to survive, I just ask you, is this helping you? Like, is wearing that mask helping you? Because I did a lot of things to survive, right? And my ancestors taught me a lot of things. And I'm not here to shame my ancestors, right? There are strong Black folks who got me to where I am, but what they learned to survive does not work for me anymore. I am not thriving, pretending to be okay or stuffing things down. And a lot of folks had to do things to get me here, but what can I do for the next generation, right? What am I putting out into the next world? Because just gluing everything together, putting on a smile, throwing a hashtag and smiling is not thriving to me. I need to be really honest. I feel I have to be better than my white counterparts just to be in the room or taken seriously. It's really rough. Thank you so much for sharing that. I understand, as someone who has, I call it resting nice face. I have been in different spaces where, because I haven't been argumentative or because I appear kind, and then I'll say things later after I get in the door, but because I might come off soft, I've gotten into different places and had more privilege, or gotten hired, or, oh, you never cause any problems, or you're just like us, or, I have been accepted or embraced in different communities that are not my own because I have just not really said what I thought. And just to get that job, just to move up that ladder, just to, do 3 times more just to get as much money, right? And like, that's part of surviving. And I am not telling people like not to survive. People have lost their jobs. People are going through so much loss. They've lost family members. I know people are trying to keep it together. If it is safe, if it feels like it's okay to stop pretending, to stop wearing masks, to stop competing, right? To stop code switching, because sometimes I need those code switching so I can get policies through the door, so I can actually do advocacy work. But if you can move to places where you don't have to do that anymore, I encourage you to just inquire and ask. And I have amazing allies. I have people who, like, I mean, Erica's one of them, people who, and Eliana and so many other folks who support my work and support me as a person, and who say, okay, if I present this idea, it's going to go well. Might not go so well if I present it. And you know what? It's the meeting before the meeting. So are you actually working with white counterparts or folks in your work who might see you? And are you having the meeting before the meeting about what do we need to do together? Because an organization can look like that. And this doesn't need to be an us versus them, but how do we work together? And that mainstreaming can be so, so challenging. What can we as a community do to raise the awareness and sensitivity of our white caregivers and providers? That's a great question, Dan. I think one of the big things is, if you're working with vulnerable populations who don't look like you, who is your cultural broker who is at the table, at the door with you, just there talking with you about what actually works for folks? And are you working with the folks and asking what they need, right? I think we make a lot of decisions about people without them. So I'll be in conversations where everyone's talking about homelessness and how we need to fix it and change it. And I'm like, why is no one who's been formerly homeless or currently experiencing homelessness on this panel? Where are those people? Like, that's the brilliance of lived experience, of peer support, of that work, is because we want to integrate that perspective. So are those people who maybe your former patients, can they do presentations to your current providers? Like, where are you having that dialogue about what worked for them, what didn't work so well, and authentically? And I do encourage people to take anti-racist trainings. I don't say don't do that, but I ask, where are you changing policies? Because if everyone looks the same and you're serving a population that doesn't look like you, there's a problem there. There's a reason someone didn't get their door. And people need to look at their policies, right? How are you hiring people? Where are they getting into? And I think we've done this really interesting thing of moving from anti-racist conversations to diversity and inclusion, because diversity and inclusion feels safer. That feels like an easier conversation to have than like actually talking about anti-racist. And you have to talk about both, because diversity without inclusion is tokenism. And I have been a token in many situations. I didn't even realize I was a token until later. I was like, oh my gosh, I was totally tokenized. They needed my face to sell this idea, but I didn't actually have true decision-making power. So when I say true decision-making power, don't invite people to the table unless you really are inviting them to make decisions. Mic drop. I love a good mic drop. Yes, and I'm just seeing Erica lift her hands up. Okay. Sometimes we get punished, shamed, marginalized, tokenized if we set down our mask and speak the truth. Can you speak to this? Have you experienced this? Yes, absolutely. I have definitely been tokenized. And so that's where I need my allies. That's where the meeting before the meeting happens, where I'm meeting with someone who, honestly, if they present it, someone's going to listen to them, because I work in a racist world. So if I have a white colleague who's down for the cause, I have a wonderful colleague, Brianna Gilmore, who, when she presents certain things, people are just like, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea. And I was like, I just said that, but okay. And it's not about my ego. I'm like, what's the right thing to get done? And then we can help change the mood. But I'm talking about strategy. Like, are we texting during the meeting? Hey, I need you to advocate for this policy, right? And calling things for what they are. So I mean, I can definitely go off, but I think if it doesn't feel safe to you to be your true authentic self, I want you to listen to your gut. But I want you to take your mask off if you need mental health support. Is that an agreement we can make, right? Like, maybe at work, you're like, I got to be 50% of myself because I still need this paycheck, right? Kelechi, that sounds cool. But when you need mental health support, or you need someone to show up for you, or you're really struggling, please don't wear a mask. If you got to be someone else at work, it's unfortunate, but I understand. And I hope that makes sense. please, please, please take good care of yourself. Okay. Even though asking diverse consumers is recognized as a best practice, money and time for effective outreach and cultural brokers seems hard to come by. Absolutely. So one of the things, and I got to do this with Marin County, and I think I see a couple people from Marin County. I want to call out Kristen Gardner and Julie Kawasaki, who's on the call. So we did this entire community-based participatory action research project with young people. So there was a problem in Marin County where young people were not getting correct access to help. Like they were mostly going into, they needed to get different sorts of support. And grassroots organizations were really supporting them, but they weren't getting the money. And the county services were a little bit more clinical and maybe like a little scary for like young people. So this entire project, yes, it was innovation funded. So it was funded out of Mental Health Services Act, which is an entire community planning process and a bit advanced. But what happened was when you actually had the people, young folks, so these are transitional age youth, gender diverse, I mean, they were the most diverse group of young people I've ever met. They actually created their own focus groups, interviewed other youth, and got youth's perspective of what youth actually needed. And it was so much more impactful than me coming in as an adult saying, hey kids, what do you want, right? So how are you partnering with young folks or other people from different communities to have them talk to their own communities and hear what they really need? And yes, fund that. Please fund that, because if we're saying that racial disparities and racism is a public health crisis, then why isn't there public health crisis money attached to the solutions, right? If this is such an important problem, and if we're all talking about it and hashtagging up the wazoo, then the funds need to match that. And that time to have cultural brokers, that time, that investment is really important. And communities know what they want. They know what works for them. And they could use your expertise as well. I think it's really a really good partnership. So I think we have 1 minute left, so I'll take one more question. What would you recommend for outreach to BIPOC older adults? Oh, that is such a good question. I wish there was another like older adult in the space to just chime in and say something beautiful. So I encourage you to do that. But it's, where do older adults meet or connect these days? I have a friend who's literally writing older adults letters. Like that is what she's doing because she knows a lot of folks are isolated. So I think one of those things that to think about is like, where are people currently? Who are their networks? Who are their family and who's visiting them? Because isolation is really, really important around suicide prevention. So if anyone has any information about what you're personally doing, this is not my area of expertise, but it's an important thing to uplift. And thank you for putting radical self-care in the chat. I'm going to put one thing in the chat. It is a link to a blog that I talked about reimagining self-care as a radical act of love. Please, please, please just read and share. And if it's helpful, that's amazing. But I have taken up a lot of space. So I want to make sure that I share that space, right, with other folks who have other information for you. So I will be putting that in chat. And for all of those who I didn't get to your perspectives, if you privately chat me, I will type back to you. So I will be typing up a storm. Thank you so much. And please, please, please remember those two things, connectivity and where can you disrupt things? Where's your power? Please, please find it. You have it. I really appreciate it. So I'll hand it back over to you, Dan.
Wow. Thank you, Kelechi. That was a really powerful presentation. And thanks for sharing so much of yourself with us. We really are very, very grateful. And so now on to a panel discussion for a part of our program for today. And we asked these community members and leaders to join us today and share their personal and professional local experiences and perspectives on the issue of mental health and racism. And we're really excited about who we have with us today. First off, we have Barbie Robinson, who is the director of the Sonoma County Department of Health Services, which includes the Sonoma County Behavioral Health Division. Barbie is also the interim executive director of the Sonoma County Community Development Commission. And Nubia Padilla is the executive director at Humanidad Therapy and Education Services. And Victoria Brown, a licensed marriage and family therapist who's affiliated with Mother's Care. And our moderator will be Alegria de la Cruz from the Sonoma County Office of Equity. So Alegria, I think you're up to take the panel away, and thank all four of you for joining us today and being part of this panel.
Thank you for unmuting me. I was feeling super powerless in that moment. And gosh, Kelechi, I am so full with your words and your wisdom and the space that you've created for this conversation today. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your generosity of spirit and your vulnerability and how brave you are and how your bravery literally is saving lives. So, okay. We are entering month 10 of this pandemic. We are facing fear and instability due to the ever-present threat to our health and well-being in many ways that many of us had not been exposed in such a direct way before COVID-19. And from those of us from communities that have existed an ever-present threat to our health and well-being, this is a particularly fraught time. I just want to make sure we're talking and centering kind of folks of color in this moment. According to CDC data from August of this year, Latinx and Native American communities had 3 times more cases from COVID than white people. In the same time, Black families suffered double the deaths caused by the virus in comparison to white people. In Sonoma County, at the highest point of the racialized spike of this virus, 91% of adults and 98% of children with COVID are Latinx. So COVID has laid bare the real threat to structural and institutional racism. And what a time to think about mental health and racism, another completely different set of structures and institutions, yet ones that connect to each other in deep, sad, dangerous ways. So I'm going to borrow some words from Dr. Kenneth Hardy, who says that racial oppression is a traumatic form of interpersonal violence, which can lacerate the spirit, scar the soul, and puncture the psyche. And without a clear and descriptive language to describe this experience, those who suffer cannot coherently convey their pain, let alone heal. And he follows by saying, instead of asking what's wrong with them, we need to ask the trauma-informed question, what has happened to them? So the first question I want to pose to the panel, and I'm gonna give this one to Barbie. Barbie, how do you experience and witness and explain the intersection of mental health and racism in your community? How does racism impact the mental health, your mental health, the mental health of your community? What does it look like? How do you feel that every day?
So first of all, thank you, Kelechi, for sharing just some beautiful words and inspiration and insight and, finger snaps and, affirming. I was actually taking notes that I need to call you because you said I'm used to working twice as hard to get half as much, but you figured out a way to work, 3 times and get equal pay. So, I will be calling you after this presentation to get some feedback on your magic, because that's progress. But I think, it starts with just a recognition that racism is trauma. I mean, there's just no other way to put it other than racism is trauma. And when we think about what trauma is and how it shows up, we often talk a lot about the physical impacts, right? The infant mortality rates within Black communities, violence in Black communities, but the lasting impacts of trauma in our DNA is really important and something for all of us to explore and think about, especially in the Black community and the Latinx community. That trauma shows up in so many different ways in our lives. And for me personally, to stand in the space as a Black woman and as a Black woman leading on the front lines in the COVID pandemic, it is a challenge. It has been, a struggle emotionally to show up in spaces where we see the continuum of racism. So the blatant racism of being called the N-word, to the more subtle passive racism of microaggressions, of, you know, questioning my aptitude or my ability to stand in this space as a leader, to deliver results, to call into question my intentions. You know, I was journaling, which has really been therapeutic for me, you know, about the experiences, and feeling like, you know, what came to mind was this notion of an assumption of incompetent until proven competent, an assumption of negative intentions until proven to have positive intentions, an assumption of you know, ill will, an assumption of, you know, so many negative assumptions, and being in a space where I'm actively, you know, trying to overcome that. And I think of, you know, my ancestors and other people of color that are standing in this space and trying to lead. And across the country, women of color in particular, I'm hearing the same story. You know, the way that it's showing up and the impact that it's having on our mental health has been devastating. And I stand in spaces as a strong leader, but I'm not afraid. You know, therapy over silence is important. And you know, I'm not afraid to talk about my mental health needs. But I know that this is, you know, the tremendous impact that it has on the Black community and Brown communities is devastating. And COVID didn't create the trauma, but it's absolutely laying bare, you know, the trauma of racism and compounding it.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to mute myself again. So the next question is for Victoria Brown. Ms. Brown, can you tell us about what lessons you have learned about serving the mental health needs of your community through ongoing crisis, right? Sonoma County is no stranger to devastation, whether it's pandemics or fires, 3 weeks of brutality in the face of marching, young people in our streets. What can you tell us about, you know, how do you serve those communities in these times?
Well, first I want to add to that list budget cuts every year. That I actually, I'll give you a little bit of history. I've actually been working in the mental health system in different counties for a very long time. You know, let's see, when did I start? In the 1980s, and that's just in California. And one of the things that I remember very clearly was we were going through a major budget cut. This was probably in the 70s or 80s. I can't remember which now. There's been so many. And people were emptying out the state hospital. And so people were just basically falling out of the state hospital into nothing. There were no halfway houses, not as much as San Francisco used to have. And you couldn't stay there for as long as you needed to, which if you needed to be in a halfway house for the rest of your life, you couldn't do that anymore. So the kinds of things that happen to mental health, budget-wise and money-wise, is trauma. That, you know, and trauma to all the staff people trying to work with all these people who are now out on the street. They are no longer captive audiences, and like they were in the state hospital. So now they're all out on the street and with no place to live, because if you get SSI, you can either eat or you can find a place to live, but you cannot do both. And now you can't even do both. I mean, you can't even do, you can't find a place to live. You don't make enough money on SSI to, you know, unless they take Section 8. And lots of places.
So how as a practitioner are you able to, you know, I think address what you're naming, right? Which is the harm that poverty and the harm that the actual institutional and structural harm that is done to poor people's mental health as a result of our disinvestment in those same communities.
The way I did it and the way a lot of my colleagues have done it is that we're really straightforward with the people that we work with. And so we will have conversations about this, you know, okay, yeah, they got money, they just don't want to give it to us. You're right, they do. Now, how can we manage, you know, what can we do with your situation? What are you willing to do? It wasn't that we would say, okay, all the responsibilities on you, you know, in terms of services, but this is what is available. And sometimes, a lot of times we went over and above what we needed to be doing. You know, we would drive them around in our cars to get them places because there was no, you know, no money for bus tickets. And eventually, you know, as we complained to more and more people, those kinds of things kind of started to happen for us. But we had to advocate not only for the client, but we had to advocate for the direct service portion, you know, because that's what I did.
Yeah,
I'm direct service.
You know, I think this question is also so relevant to, you know, to Nubia as a leader in a community organization that is directed at serving the mental health needs of our community. You know, how have you kind of pulled in all of this new responsibility and all of these new impacts to people who are already vulnerable, right? How has Humanidad kind of shifted to address the additional stress that our communities feel in the face of these ongoing crises? Nubia, I think you're muted. So okay. Yes, there we go.
Okay, thank you, Alegria. And I just, before I start, I want to thank you, Erica and Dan, for providing this, for setting the stage for these conversations. We need these conversations and much more. Anyway, I have to say that one of the things that we have been learning is that, especially for the Latinx community, there is a sense that it's a lot of resilience, and but sometimes it's confused with the not needing the service. And reality is that we have a history in which we have to be resilient, but it doesn't mean that we don't need the services. And it causes sometimes a problem for the person because they're so used to take it in that they don't look for help, or for the other person not to think that they need the help. So that's one thing that is important for us to remember. The other one is that we need to, there are solutions, there are community solutions, but they haven't been put to a scale, or they haven't, sometimes they have been ignored. Like before Kelechi was mentioning about CRDP, the communities are working in real solutions. And now we need to, but there are pilots. I don't believe in pilots. I believe in solutions that are tested. And so this is one thing. The other thing is that you have to customize the interventions. It's no one fits all. We have, for instance, a couple that needs services, looking for services, but they cannot access because they don't have, believe it or not, cell phone. They don't have computer and they don't have access to internet. So we have to figure out ways or places where they can go and get the services that they need. And we have some students that are going to school, high education, but even though they have access to mental health services, they look for services through us because they feel that they won't relate to their experience. So things like that. We need to programs and services guided for the community and no, guided for the community. It's not guided by somebody making decisions there and telling them what they need. They need to come from the community. So we need to include more people in those decisions. And we need to bring solutions that are no normalized or evaluated in populations that are not ours. For instance, some tools that are used to support, to determine or to evaluate the person were normalized in communities that didn't have anything to do with them. So with how they can really understand what the person is going through or went through. One thing I want to say, very important for us, is if we just foster in the system, because the system needs to change, it foster a sense of belonging. It will take care of a lot of problems in mental health. Because when we suffer racism and all of that, that's a way of aggression, is emotional abuse. And when we go day by day and feeling, and the person goes day by day feeling the microaggressions in the environment, it adds up and it creates a lot of mental health issues.
Thank you, Nubia. You know, Barbie, from a systems perspective, as the director of the department that, you know, provides mental health services for the county, you know, how has the county's way of addressing mental health needs in the community after these series of crises, how has that evolved for you at that level? Mute. Can we unmute Barbie?
Yeah, so thank you. Right. I was in a battle with, you can't unmute, you're not allowed to do so. So yeah, I think that, you know, there's so much work to be done. I often talk about mental health being one of the greatest civil rights issues of our time. And in part because of the lack of access. But then when you also, you know, just in general, there's not parity. Your medical services, the amount, duration, and scope of services that you can get, it pales in comparison to, the medical services you can get. The behavioral health services pales in comparison to that level of service you can get. And then when you couple that with the access for people of color, Black people, Latinx folks, Indigenous folks, it is very, very limited in terms of, you know, the availability of therapists that are operating in cultural humility. And so, you know, a lot of work has to be done. When I came to Sonoma County, it's been one of my missions to address the lack of parity for mental health and behavioral health services. And, you know, we often overlay the system, right? And by the system, I mean the existing table, right? That we are all sitting at, that is not owned, was not created by people of color. I don't want to get all into the weeds about just even DSM-4 and diagnoses and who created those diagnoses and how does that show up from a cultural perspective in terms of how we look at, disorders of the brain. And so I think that, you know, that's a whole nother presentation. But in terms of, government needing to expand and increase access, it's critical. I think that is part of what, you know, we were able to achieve with Measure O. So thank you all who voted to pass Measure O. And that is the beginning of the work, right? The lack of resources. We put out a UC Berkeley, a report in partnership with UC Berkeley that looked at high utilizers. And, you know, 1% of those that use government services account for tremendous resources in our criminal justice system, in our emergency departments, homeless shelters. And what was startling about this report, not just from the high utilizers perspective and the need to invest more upstream, earlier interventions, but the fact of the matter is that those individuals were 3 times more likely to be Black. And Black folks only account for 1.7% of the county's population. And so when you think about that and you think about parity, it's laid plain right in our eyes. And that study is important because we can utilize that information to make the case around budget priorities and budget decisions. It's hard to do that absent data, and data is really important for us. And so I think more work to be done as we move forward with expanding access. And then, also thinking about how do we bring cultural appropriateness and change the table in terms of how we're defining need.
Thank you so much, Barbie. That's a perfect kind of segue into our next question, which is really about, how do you see and understand, and how are you seeing community really develop culturally specific practices that are successful, right, to uplift community spirit? How are you seeing those at play at all in the community? And this is a question, I think, to the practitioners. So, Ms. Brown, Nubia, how are you seeing, the way cultural and traditional practices show up in community to really uplift spirits at these times?
I think I guess I can go. I think it's important for us to understand that there are solutions that are not the traditional mental health solutions, and they're proven to work. So when I have seen intersectional solutions, different groups, LGBTQ groups working with Latinx and so on and so forth, that work, and that they are not necessarily the clinical type that we see day by day. And they work, and they are designed. The most important piece here is that they are designed or guided by the community. So I see that, but also when we think about how to work with the system and include all these practices and these solutions, that is, we need to start by working with education, educating the person to be able to be a good civic representative, or and civic engagement, or how to get to know the system and how to understand what is going on, so they can really work with the system. But the other piece I want is very important, is that we have to do a multilateral approach. It's not just from one perspective, or we have to do this first and second. We can do several things at a time, and communities participate, and they understand things work. So give them the stage. I would say give them the stage. Create these places where the communities come and tell the decision-making persons or whatever gurus what is working for them. And I said before this, but I think we need to bring this solution to scale, and we need to understand, go there, preserve that is so valuable for the communities, and put it to scale. So that's how I think. And one thing very important is culture is healing. So keep this in mind. Culture is healing.
Thank you, Nubia. I wanna toot a little bit of Humanidad's horn, who just recently kind of got rolled into the Sonoma County Secure Families Collaborative, which is a program that's focused on immigrants in Sonoma County and making sure that folks have access to services. And we in Sonoma County are really unique in that we created with Humanidad's real kind of creativity, a program that recognizes that there are mental health impacts to immigrants because of that instability that people feel with regard to status, especially in the last 4 years of this administration. And so Humanidad has really kind of created some space at the SRJC and has created these kind of cultural circles for immigrant youth called convivencias. And that is such, I think, a beautiful example of how you let the youth lead, and creating that space and kind of setting that stage, for our youth to come together to share what it feels like to be an immigrant in 2020 in the United States. I think is a really beautiful example of, the ways in which la cultura si cura, and letting go of that space and making sure that we're kind of creating it for people to come up with it. I'm also reflecting on the ways in which, I'm part of an Aztec dance circle, and And, you know, Friday nights for me were like medicine, because there was nothing like being in a drum circle with people that you are dancing your feelings out with. And at the end of it, you get to close, you know, that experience as a circle with those traditional practices of sharing space and sharing words. And so I think that, you know, really recognizing some of these structures that might not otherwise be acknowledged as healing, right, as medicine, and finding ways to make sure that people know about those, the existence of those things, and giving them the honor and the value that they really do have for so many people in our community. So Ms. Brown, sorry, totally just took moderator privilege. Oh my goodness.
You did, girl.
But I would love,
you know, I did most of my work outside of Sonoma County, but what we would always do is we would include members of the community, including folks at the liquor store who ran the liquor store. We would say, if you see so-and-so here, you know, let us know, or, you know, do whatever. So you bring in people who aren't even part of, you know, the system, if you will, or the mental health system. But you bring in and you reach out to and you make connections with. And, you know, connectivity, as Kelechi, you know, in her wonderful talk, I really enjoyed it. That's, you know, that's a way to engage the community in working with these people that they see all the time anyway. So there's that, you know, the physical community around you that you draw in, but also when you're creating your programs. I agree with you, Nubia. I don't like pilots either, because you already know. You already know what the problem is. The pilot is just, oh, well, that worked. Okay, next.
Yes.
But this one program that I worked with, it was a behavioral health court. And it had a lawyer, probation, it had the sheriff's department, it had its own judge, it had every, you know, sort of aspect, you know, in the criminal justice and mental health system that, you know, would have, that this person, whoever it was, would end up, you know, being in touch with or in contact with. And we all came together and we worked together. But you have to have the will to do that.
that is a great ending and a way to kind of spin the question to Barbie. So what does it take to get the political, what does it take to get the political will to build in some of these culturally responsive practices into institutions like the county's mental health system, right? How do we, like, I think you really talked about that in your answer to the first question, but like, how do we build that table so that these are actual choices that people have, right? That may not even exist because we just don't even see them as such yet.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that really is the key, you know, who's sitting at the table. You know, I would say, you know, one of the things that I feel is really important for white allies to understand is that dismantling racism means that the table that you're inviting someone to isn't the table, right? That you need to address and redress the challenges that communities of color have been so disproportionately impacted by, denied access to resources. And then you need to sit together and build the table together. And so that is where I think it is so critical and so important when we talk about dismantling racism, that we really recognize and understand that it means different voices at the table, having a conversation about what the system should be, what it should look like, and bringing the resources to bear. One of the things I wanted to say about this conversation around practices is understanding that, you know, sort of Eurocentric models of care and are not the starting point for many communities of color. And when we think about the stigma and accessing resources, you have to think about what are the cultural determinants, what are the social determinants of successful access, engagement, and outcomes in mental health. And so that is the framework and the shift that has to be done. And we got to start that work now. We are in a moment in our society culturally where enough is enough, and we've seen that. And the enough is enough is action. It's not just this forum, right? So I challenge everybody outside of this meeting tonight to think about what are you going to do to change the opportunity to change the table, to have a different table, and having the courage to think about what that table should look like. So, and allowing other people the space, that some of the racism, right? You don't talk like me. You didn't go to my schools. You didn't engage in the system in the way that I did. So somehow that's negated. And I know for a lot, it's such a foreign concept, right? Because people don't understand that's how, I sit in a space where I'm perpetuating institutional racism because the system was designed, based on institutional racism. And so, I know we have a question about that, so I'll calm myself down, Alegria. And I think, there's a lot of work that can be done, and thinking about how to design systems that look at cultural determinants for successful treatment.
Alegria, and I would like to add to what just Barbie said is we can start by doing simple things like changing the hiring practices, because that's what you were referring, how to include those people that don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't sound like us, and how to include them in the conversation and the services and the whole thing. So I want to add, just by by doing that, we can change a lot.
And let me just throw a little, of my experience. And the program that I worked for in San Francisco, we pretty much did that. And it was successful. It ran for many years. It may still be running. So it isn't that, oh my God, this is, an insurmountable task. It really isn't. All we did was write a grant, to provide certain services for homeless people. And we figured out how we wanted to do that. We figured out who we wanted to hire, and that's what we did. And it was a very diverse group of people. And we were very skilled at working with homeless people in San Francisco. So you do have to have that will.
I think just to kind of put a cherry on top of this, and to really pull it together. Barbie, I love this, and I'm not alone in loving it. The comments are gold. This idea that, we're not sitting at an old table. We actually got to build a new table, and then we have to set a whole new set of invitations to that table that we built. And then I think there's another important step that happens that I'm really hearing from all of you, which is that then there's work to kind of bind hands around that table and protect that space, right? Whether it's, hiring new folks, Nubia, as you said, Victoria saying, making sure that continues over generations. Barbie, is that a hand up?
Alegria, yes, a critical component and something that I'm challenging myself in 2021 to look at is, we can build new tables all day. We can invite people to the table, but what a setup when we've not, really truly said we want, we're accepting you at the table as you are, versus you can come to the table, but you better show up like me. And we don't build capacity for people to understand the systems. I talk a lot about my grandmother who did not have a high school education, but I promise you she could have been a national debate champion. Okay, because her, her aptitude and her ability, to close to make an argument and then close one, powerful. However, because she did, no high school education, who's inviting her to the table? So it's really important not just to recreate the table, but allow the space to groom and support people in understanding the system, but then also the space that you can be different at the table, and the table can be, we can talk about things differently. What I've often seen in our collective spaces is that we invite people to the table, and then they're like, well, they don't participate, or they don't know how to do this, or they don't know how to do that. And that is such a marginalizing, alienating, racist, and traumatic experience for people. So I had to add that. Sorry.
No, I'm glad you did. I mean, I think that's everything, right? It's like, that is actually the recreation of the table, is saying, we're also going to throw out that you don't have to put your napkin in your lap, and knowing, and knowing which fork to use at that moment, is not the most important thing. It's about, really kind of breaking bread together. And so I love this analogy. Can you tell? So, just following up, we heard Kelechi talk so powerfully about what it means to wear a mask, and strategically what it means to take that mask off and decide that you're going to, to be like, hey, this is who you really hired today. How do you bring that practice of, unmasking? How do you bring that practice of disruption as women of color into a system that is begging for us to disrupt it every day?
Now they ask.
Yeah. Well, no, but I mean, the system's begging everybody else around it, and the system is like, oh, can you put your napkin in your lap, please? Right? Like, so how do you all bring, that moment of unmasking and of disrupting in a strategic way to your work every day? And who do you need? I'm gonna add another question. And who do you need around you when you do that?
Y'all.
Oh, wow.
Folks that think like y'all.
I just want to answer that, because when I came to this country, my goal and my dream was to look, sound like anybody else here. So I tried so hard. I did whatever I could. And unfortunately for me, after the many years and hitting my head against the walls that I found, I realized that the best way to do that is to be yourself and to be proud of what you are. And recognizing that there are things that don't work the same way for you, but this is what you are, and this is what you bring. And just say it. This is what I bring, this is what I am, and here I am. So that's one way for me. The other way is when we see somebody that actually needs help, needs that support to do the same, or to feel good about what they are doing and what they are, just let them be, and provide this empowerment to say, the way you are is what you're supposed to be. That is easy, but the difficult piece is to convince the rest of the humanity that that's the way to go. So I think it has to be a process of awareness that we are walking day by day.
Nubia, as we were prepping for this, you remember that I said that one of the things that I love about being in your presence in meetings is that you really do bring your full self. And we talked about how sometimes you just bust into Spanish, and it makes me feel so at home. And so that there's such a gift to, that you give to others when you are able to also be your full self. And, and how that makes everybody in your presence feel in the glory of somebody who is like, well, soy yo, right? I'm just going to be my full self. And so it just unlocks something that I think is really powerful. And I just want to love on you a little bit for that, because it is something that allows it, it really does like allow for us to all just open up a little bit more and a little bit more vulnerably and realistically to be who we are.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in terms of disruption, I'm reminded of a presentation by a psychologist many years ago, and the title of that presentation was "Racism by the Well-Intentioned." And so he said, I don't want to talk about the 10% of the population, that espouses, belongs to the Klan. I want to talk about the 90% of the population that really truly believe, right? They're not, raging on issues of race in that way, but still espouse and support racist ideas and institutional racism. And so I've made a commitment my entire life to stand in the space around that type of racism, right? Where it's not intended, or sometimes intended in a microaggression, but to really be in a space to disrupt that kind of racism that I know, cuts so deep in trauma, and creating mental health challenges for people, and has created them for myself. And so that's really, the space that, I choose to stand in. I know my presence is disruptive. My presence as a Black woman named Barbie with dreadlocks is disruptive. And so, that in it of itself is a challenge for people to get their head around that name. That was a revolutionary act by my aunt, to name me Barbie, right? And what that meant, and really helped in my evolution as a woman, right? To disrupt the notion of, the looks and the, all of that comes with Mattel, right? I think that it's what disruption looks like is standing in a space and holding a space for people that look like me, and allowing them to come into their full self, and to hold the space for white people who don't look like me, who don't look like others, to do their work. And that's, I think, really important, and a challenge that I have for every white ally on this call is to really think about how you show up, and your own microaggressions, and how your implicit bias and sometimes explicit bias shows up in the way that you do your work. It is important to remember that allyship, and wanting to dismantle racism really is about allowing the space for people to lead. And I've experienced in our county that that's a challenge. What often happens is, I want to talk about racism. I want to talk about equity. It kind of lets off a little pressure, and people, this talk about it. And I came to Sonoma County, right? Because all this literature, we advance equity, reducing disparities, reducing health disparities. And then there just seemed to be something like an invisible fence or something that didn't allow us to get over the hump and to actually get to action. And I think that is really important. Many of the tables I sit around are predominantly white tables. And so how do you as white allies decide, I don't have to sit at this table to move the work forward, but I can sponsor, mentor, champion a person of color to sit at this table to drive the destiny. And I think that is my role as a disruptor.
Well, for me, I've been a disruptor ever since I've been in the field. And I have never really had much of a problem speaking my mind. So my mask is actually who I am. What I've had to learn is, more or less to get people on my side. Some people call it army building. That's not really what I mean, but what I see is necessary is when you've got a table and it's filled with mostly white people, that's who they're going to listen to. So if I can get allies to, sort of support my position, whatever that might be, if my allies support it, then I have a better chance of it getting heard and listened to and dealt, and responded to, as opposed to sort of me, do this, do that, you need to do this, you need to do that, even if I bring in statistics. So I've had to learn negotiating skills, if you will. And I've also had to learn to pick my battles. That's why earlier I said, when you asked what I needed to, I said y'all, because, and a lot of the people who are, in on this meeting, everybody has their part to do. And if they can understand what their part is, I think more work can get done, more decisions can be made that benefit people and that allow people to get what they need when they need it. Not, oh, this is what we say you need, and you're getting it now, as opposed to, well, you needed it 3 years ago.
Going to this question around, how do you strategize for those moments where you take your mask off too?
Mm-hmm.
And, Victoria, I love that you said, you needed this crew. I wondered if Nubia and Barbie could also talk about some of the groundwork, some of the behind the scenes stuff that we end up having to do, to kind of line up folks. Victoria, you said you're like, making sure that you can roll deep into some different, right?
Yeah, army building almost, just to, you walk in there and you're not the only person ranting and raving, if you will, so that they, so they're like, oh God, there's that Black woman again. It's not that, then it becomes real, as if it wasn't before. And that kind of has a kind of a twofold effect, because you not only, have your allies, but they get to kind of learn, oh, okay, this is how I can, affect some change here. I can partner with these ideas and, and say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll buy what she's saying. That sounds good. And, so I'm getting the support that I might need to push the agenda, further the agenda, and the supporting cast, if you will, are doing their job, and they can go home and go, gee, I'm doing a good job here. I'm actually helping people access this system. That's what the system is supposed to be. You're supposed to be able to access it.
So I wanna take a couple of questions from the panel here. Barbie, it looks like you had your
No,
hand up.
I was just going to say that I think it's important to remember that racism is not the responsibility of those that are enduring it.
Thank you.
I often talk about, the importance of, people understanding that I can't carry the burden of racism and the responsibility to eradicate it. And so I challenge everybody on the phone, right, on this call, to really think about, how do you stand in a space to eradicate it, because you can't really have the, I can't bear the burden, right? I can think about having a conversation about diversity in education, and my statement was, when I stop having the conversation about diversity in education, or students feeling like they have to carry the mantle, when I'm not the one doing this, then I know that we're making progress. And so I think it's really important for us to really understand who needs to dismantle the system, who has the power to dismantle the system. I come from a place of power. I stand in power. I'm going to do that all day, every day, in any space. It's important to understand from an institutional perspective who owns the power, who controls the power, and how do you show up in a space where you're willing to, eradicate racism, because I really don't, that's not really my responsibility. So I think, continuing that conversation and that dialogue and communication for people to understand that, not in a hostile way. This is not to make anybody wrong. But there, I've talked about it in terms of the election, and, it's at some point, white folks have to talk to white folks about, the issues, and people of color can't be saddled with that challenge, and that, that challenge of addressing the issue.
Thank you, Barbie. I mean, that's another great segue into a question that came from Sergio, which kind of challenges us as people of color to also investigate, our own anti-Blackness, our own anti-indigeneity. And so the question that Sergio posed to us, which I think is a beautiful one, is how do we deal with, the implicit biases that we as people of color in a system that values white supremacy? How do we challenge our own practices of, racism against, especially in the Mexican community, right? In Mexico, Indio is a bad word, right? So we bring all of that to this country, and our indigenous language speaking communities here in our system. Sometimes at the hands of Mexican Americans, they have less belief in our ability to serve them than somebody who's white, than somebody who's Black. I understand in the African American community, we also have, the kind of all the challenges that come with being dark skinned, light skinned, natural haired, processed hair, all of that stuff, right? We bring all of the challenges of white supremacy into our own communities. And so the question that I think Sergio really poses to us is, even if our responsibility is both dealing with racism ourselves, how do we also challenge ourselves to be anti-racist within our own communities of color?
Well, I would say that consciousness is very important. I have had experiences where I'll be working with an individual and they want something. And I'm saying, no, you can't have it. This is not what's going to happen. And then they look around for a white person to talk to. Is there somebody else I can talk to? And, and they'll look around for like her or him, if they're white. And I'm like, no, you get to talk to me. So we often perceive each other, in the African American community as without power. And if we want something done, we ain't looking at each other. So I think we need to be conscious of our own biases. First, we need to admit that we have them.
Nubia?
I was in mute. One thing I have been working with the community for many, many years. And one thing that surprises me is that among us, I am talking about the Latinx community, you can see even more bias, and it's difficult to see that. But one thing I use especially with the parents, and I always ask good questions. How do you feel if that were happening to you? How do you feel if somebody's doing this to your child? And so I keep asking the questions. Sometimes I don't even wait for the answer, or sometimes we have a conversation, but those type of questions, and being there and call them on those things and making them understand that there is no right for one group or the other. It's just asking good questions.
Oh, that's so powerful, Nubia. Harvey.
Yeah, I was just going to say colorism is real and internalized oppression is real. And, I think providing the space for people of that have physiological characteristics that are more indigenous, when we think about the Latinx community, or more African, wider nose, broader lips, being not accepted. But again, this goes back to the table, right? So if you're looking at who gets to sit at the table, colorism or racial ambiguity, there's, that those dynamics really kind of perpetuate. And this is, that racism of the well-intentioned. When we think about the language we use, Black Monday, it was a dark night. It was a, when you think about word and color association and how that can perpetuate perceptions of people and who they are and what their intentions are. Again, that's why I keep saying I challenge everybody to look at how our biases show up. Look at how we define beauty. Look at how, who we think is intelligent. I often have this conversation with white women in particular about sexism, right? And having to have this conversation about intersectionality of racism and sexism and this idea that, yes, as a woman, I'm less than, right? I'm less than because I'm not a man, but you were never thought of as 3/5 a person, right? And so that brings with it a whole set of other assumptions about who I am, who my people are, and what our capacity is and aptitude can really ever be if I was never fully perceived as a human. And you'll say, well, that has nothing to do with me. But if you have systems and institutions that perpetuate that, not in that, oh, Barbie's 3/5 of a person, but in the way that we value, you know, do I use this language? Do I talk this way? Did I go to this school? How do I show up? Do I know which fork is the fork for the salad and which fork is, you know, for your meat? You know, that whole dynamic, you know, that perpetuates this idea that there's a dominant culture that is superior and that there are other cultures that are not. And so, you know, for me, it's really thinking about, you know, the internalized oppression and how do we create spaces for people to look, you know, any spectrum, you know, on you know, physiological characteristics. I have a rainbow in my family, very light complexion sisters to very dark complexion sisters. And how do we create a space where that is acceptable in diversity? And how do we address those issues? And so I think that is part of the, you know, 2021 is going to be the year that I don't know all 100 and some people that was on this presentation, but, you know, counting on the energy and the spirit that we're all going to take it back and do our part and start having these kind of disruptive conversations and challenging our own inequities, our own biases and ideas of equity.
Nubia, you're like, no más. Snaps.
Excited. Listen.
It's so easy to get excited on this panel tonight. I think we're going to end on that amazing message of self-love and of community and of accountability and of dreaming, right? What 2021 could be when we bring that spirit with and for each other. So I just want to thank Dan and Erica, and I want to just give a mad Zoom hug to Kelechi Ubozoh, who was incredible tonight in creating this table with us. We have 2 more Path to Hope events in December, one on December 10th at 4 p.m. with Daphne Willis, who will be talking about tools for coping with isolation, and another one on December 17th at 8:30 a.m. with Adrienne Hines, who will talk about resilience building for entrepreneurs. There's going to be links in the chat. There we go. Yay. And you don't want to miss. So 3 more events in January. Stay tuned. I just want to say thank you to these amazing women, mujeres, these women of these just powerful forces of change and love and of creativity that are going to really make a difference in our community and that already have every day. So thank you, community, for being here with us tonight. Adelante.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank
Yeah.
you. You're amazing.
Bright light on the corner of a dark street. Just a cardboard sign and a can in between some dirty bare feet. Eyes that I can't bring myself to meet. Yeah, well, I could spare 20 if I knew you'd be using it to get just what you need. And ooh, I'm just another cold shoulder. You're somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody's mother, father, somebody's someone, somebody's missing you. Wherever you came from, wherever you go, I hope you know you're somebody's someone. You're somebody's someone. Picking up the phone, who's it gonna be this time? This time. It's the sound of your voice, but it ain't really you on the line. When you're gonna come out on the other